The Caliphate, a form of rule in Islam that lasted for almost 13 centuries, from the death of the Prophet Muhammad to the overthrow of the last Ottoman Caliph in 1924.
The Arabic term for Caliph is Khalifa, which actually in essence simply means a successor or a deputy.
The ruler of the Islamic world would call himself Khalifat Rasulillah, the successor of God's messenger.
Through the centuries, the title of Caliph is a term that has been used and at times abused. In June 2014, a militant group calling itself the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, declared the establishment of a caliphate, a call rejected by most Muslims around the world. ISIL took root and expanded in Iraq and Syria. Two countries plunged into violence by the political turmoil and foreign intervention of recent years. The turmoil revived sectarian differences that go back over 10 centuries between Sunni and Shia Muslims.
إذا منذ البداية كان النزاع سياسيا مع تغليفه لبعد ديني، لأن الشرعية السياسية تقف أو تستند أو ترتكز أساسا على مبررات دينية، وهذا الأمر الذي لا زال قائما إلى يومنا هذا.
This is the story of the great split within Islam, of how this split arose from a dispute of who should succeed the Prophet Muhammad. This is the story of the Caliph. The Bay'a Mosque, outside Mecca in Saudi Arabia. It was here, in the year 622, that a delegation from the town of Medina made Bay'a, a pledge of support and shelter to the Prophet Muhammad. Shortly after, he left Mecca, emigrating to Medina with a group of followers. Over the next 10 years, Muhammad built the first Islamic state. But in June 632, the Prophet died in his capital Medina, leaving the young state without a leader.
There's a tradition that says that the Muslims on that day were like sheep on a rainy night. They were frightened and huddling together. And it's not clear whether or not the Prophet had made any plans for his succession.
Within hours of the Prophet's death, senior figures in the Muslim community came together to choose a successor to the Prophet, a Caliph. The debate was long and intense. It was the emigrants from Mecca whose arguments prevailed. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was chosen to be the first caliph in Islam.
المهاجرون طرحوا عدة مسوغات لتوليهم الأمر بعد الرسول، فيها مسوغات دينية وفيها مسوغات قبلية، لأنهم ادعوا أيضا أنهم أهل الرسول وهم أولى من غيرهم على اعتبار أن هذه الرسالة تركة.
But though they were from his tribe, Quraysh, not all the immigrants were from the Prophet's close family, the Hashemites, the descendants of Muhammad's great-grandfather, Hashim.
At that time in Arab society, the family was understood as a much larger unit. Collateral lines, uncles, brothers, cousins, and so on were all considered to be part of the clan.
Senior among the Hashemites was Ali, Muhammad's cousin, husband of his one surviving daughter, Fatima, and father of the Prophet's only living grandsons, Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein. But when the decision to choose the Caliph was taken, Ali was busy elsewhere.
At the time of the Prophet's actual death, we know that it was Ali who was in charge of the burial arrangements. Ali, as a dutiful, respectful son-in-law, cousin, was caring for the Prophet's body.
The next day, in the Medina Mosque, Abu Bakr was given bay'ah, the oath of allegiance, by the majority of the Muslim community. Ali, however, was not one of them. What happened that day would sow the seeds of a political divide that would gradually evolve into a deep religious schism. The division of Islam into Sunni and Shia.
If you ask a Sunni or a Shi'i Muslim about that moment of Muhammad's death and the decision about the leadership, you will get two very different answers. The Sunnis suggest that he hadn't actually made any clear plans for his succession on his death. The Shia would say that he had, and that he was to be succeeded by his first cousin and son-in-law, Ali.
3 months before his death, the Prophet Muhammad made a famous speech here in Ghadir Khum, an ancient resting place on the route from Mecca to Medina. A speech that has been interpreted ever since in two very different ways.
O people, of whomsoever I've been master, Ali here is to be his master. O Allah, be a supporter of whoever supports him, and an enemy of whoever opposes him, and divert the truth to Ali.
There's this moment where if you're Sunni, you believe the Prophet gave Ali the leadership of his family. If you're Shia, you believe he gave the leadership of the family, but also the whole community.
The Prophet's speech is celebrated by Shia to this day. Each year, a feast is held on the anniversary to commemorate what Shia see as Muhammad appointing Ali to be his successor. But the mainstream majority, the Sunnis, have no such feast. And no doubts about the legitimacy of Abu Bakr and the caliphs who succeeded him. Shortly after becoming caliph, Abu Bakr faced his first major challenge, a tribal revolt against the Islamic State. In this moment of peril, Ali chose unity over division and gave the oath of allegiance to the Caliph.
الإمام علي عليه السلام بعد اعتكاف لمدة معينة سجل موقفا احتجاجيا أبدى رأيه في المسألة، ثم ترجيحا لمصلحة المسلمين وضع يده في يد سائر الصحابة ووقف في وجه حركة الردة، فكانت مصلحة الإسلام عنده أولى من كل اعتبار.
Abu Bakr's rule lasted just 2 years. As he lay dying, he nominated Omar as his successor. Ten years later, in 644, Omar, the second Caliph, was assassinated, stabbed while leading dawn prayers in Medina. On his deathbed, he dictated how his successor should be chosen. Six of the closest companions of the Prophet, including Ali, would confer together and choose one amongst them. After 4 days of deliberation, Uthman was named the third Caliph. Once again, Ali had not been chosen.
He's passed over by Abu Bakr, then Omar, and then for him the harrowing moment when he's passed over in favor of Uthman.
The new Caliph came from a family of the Quraysh tribe called the Umayyads. Umayyah, the founder, had always coveted the leadership of Quraysh. Standing in his way was his uncle, Hashim, the patriarch of the Hashemites. This rivalry that would fester through the centuries had its roots in Mecca decades earlier, in the pagan years before the birth of Islam. In the year 610, in this cave outside Mecca, Muhammad received the first revelation, verses of the Quran, which set him on the path of prophecy. The emergence of a prophet among the Hashemites antagonized the Umayyads and their leader, Abu Sufyan.
كان يقول أبو سفيان سابقونا بالنسب، نافرناهم بالنسب، بالمال نافرناه. الآن عندما ظهرت دعوة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يدعون النبوة، فمن أين لنا هذه؟
For 12 years, the Umayyads led a campaign of persecution against Muhammad and his followers in Mecca. Persecution which culminated in their emigration to Medina in 622. But when the Prophet returned to conquer Mecca, Abu Sufyan realized resistance was futile and joined Islam. By 644, the rising Islamic State had expanded into a vast empire, and the Caliphate had come into the hands of an Umayyad, Uthman.
Uthman was a genius, but he employed far too many of his young cousins. The Umayyads were the aristocrat of Mecca, and they'd been great leaders of the pagan resistance. And so promoting these characters who were his lovely cousins was also, a bad political decision.
A rebellion erupted against Uthman's alleged nepotism. In 656, and after 12 years as Caliph, he was killed in his house in Medina.
بعد أن حصل ما حصل مع الأسف الشديد ووجد الإمام أن الناس تهافتت إليه، حاول الاعتذار في أكثر من مرة كما تنقل لنا النصوص التاريخية، حاول الاعتذار، ولكن بعد ذلك وجد أن المصلحة الإسلامية تحتم عليه أن يستجيب، فاستجاب وبايعه المهاجرون والأنصار.
Almost a quarter of a century after the death of the Prophet, a Hashemite, Ali, finally became the fourth Caliph.
هو باشر في خلع الولاة وعزل الولاة الذين عينوا من قبل عثمان بن عفان، لذلك بعضهم أطاع وقبل العزل وبعضهم رفض، مثل معاوية بن أبي سفيان والي الشام.
Many of Uthman's relatives were hostile to Ali's leadership, and Muawiyah demanded that Ali hand over the killers.
The dispute quickly escalated, and to strengthen his position, Ali moved the capital from Medina to his own power base in Kufa, Iraq. The Islamic State was now divided in two: the east under a Hashemite Caliph, and the west under an Umayyad governor.
نشأ ما يسمى داخل المسلمين شيعة علي وشيعة معاوية، وهنا لنلاحظ أن كلمة شيعة لم تكن تعني في ذلك الوقت مذهبا محددا، وإنما كانت تدل على حزب فلان وحزب فلان.
In 657, Ali marched his army into Syria to crush Muawiyah's mutiny. After days of bloody skirmishes, and on the last day of the battle, the army of Muawiyah was on the verge of defeat.
الإمام علي عندما وصل إلى خيمة معاوية، ومعاوية وضع فرية وخدعة ووضع الرماح على القرائين أي يفصل بين القرآن، لذلك الإمام علي أوقف القتال. الخوارج كانوا من جيش الإمام علي، فهم جاءوا إلى المعلم وقالوا له: وصلنا إلى خيمته، كان باستطاعتنا أن نقضي عليه. قال: والله أعرف، وعرفوا أنه خادع، ولكنه حكمني بكتاب الله. ولذلك الخوارج اعتبروا أنه الإمام علي لا يصلح للقيادة، لأنه خضع لمنطق لا يتفق مع منطق القتال، لأن قالوا: لماذا إذن نقاتلهم؟
These dissidents from Ali's army, the Khawarij, fixed on a ruthless way to bring an end to the struggle. The moment was chosen. Fajr, dawn prayers of the 27th of January 661, the 17th day of the holy month of Ramadan. 3 assassins made their way to 3 different places: Kufa for Ali, Damascus for Muawiyah, and Fustat in Egypt for Amr, Muawiyah's ally.
عمرو بن العاص صادف أنه لم يخرج ذلك اليوم، معاوية بن سفيان صادف أنه لم يخرج ذلك اليوم، وبالتالي استشهد الإمام علي ونجا معاوية وعمرو بن العاص.
Najaf in Iraq, a holy place to Shia Muslims. They believe Ali is buried here. For them, he is more than a caliph. He is an imam, imbued with religious authority that could be passed on only through his bloodline. So, on Ali's death, the caliphate passed to his elder son, Al-Hassan. But he would not be long in the post.
كان الحسن ذو فطنة وذكاء أنه لا يمكن الركون إلى أهل العراق. أجرى اتصالات مع معاوية، اتصالات سرية، واتفق على أن يتنازل الحسن بن علي عن حقه في الخلافة، وقرر الحسن أن يعيش بهدوء وثبات وأن يترك الزعامة ويترك السياسة لمعاوية.
Damascus, 13 centuries ago, the Umayyad capital. Though the caliphate remained in the Quraysh tribe, it had passed from the Hashemites to the Umayyads, and there it would remain for the coming century.
The crunch point really comes late in Muawiyah's reign, when he designated his son, Yazid, as his successor. And this was a real touch point for generating controversy and opposition.
Yazid's succession, on the death of Muawiyah in 680, triggered a series of events that resonate to this day. In a defiant show of opposition, Al-Hussein, younger son of Ali, refused to pledge allegiance to Yazid and set off towards Mecca on pilgrimage. On the way, he began to receive messages asking him to come to Iraq, where his supporters planned to install him as Caliph. He gathered together his family and decided to move to Kufa, his father's former capital.
Unfortunately for Hussein, his plan got to the Umayyad governor of Iraq, and he was able to block his route to the city of Kufa. And so Hussein was trapped without substantial military support at a place called Karbala.
And it was at Karbala, in October 680, that Al-Hussein and his small band of supporters met their bloody fate.
عشرات المقاتلين مع جملة من الأطفال والنساء، وكانت الملحمة التاريخية حيث انتهك المحظور والحرام، وانتهكت في الحقيقة حرمة رسول الله بما جرى في ذلك اليوم.
He and his entourage, many of his family, were massacred, and his head was sent to Yazid in Damascus.
Each year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Karbala, Shia around the world mark the event in public displays of penitence, extending sometimes even to ritual self-punishment, to atone for their forebears' failure to support Al-Hussein.
It's really seen as the great tragedy of Islam from the Shi'i perspective. This is the great disaster, is that the Prophet's family didn't get to take the caliphate and to lead the Muslims.
But 70 years after Karbala, a revolt would finally succeed in bringing the caliphate back to the family of the Prophet, the Hashemites. Al-Humayma, southern Jordan. In the 8th century, it was a settlement of one of the two major branches of the Hashemites, the Prophet's own family of the Quraysh tribe. Known as the Abbasids, These were descendants of Al-Abbas, one of Muhammad's uncles. The other branch were the Alids, descended from Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law. In 716, Abdullah, one of the Alids, arrived in Al-Humayma with a strange story.
أحد أحفاد علي بن أبي طالب مر على الخليفة الأموي سليمان بن عبد الملك فقدم له الهدايا، وفي عودته إلى المدينة المنورة شعر بألم ومرض، فقال له من معه: سممك سليمان.
Abdullah died in Al-Humayma. But in his final hours, he confessed to his Abbasid cousin, Muhammad, that he was the head of a plot to topple the Umayyads.
أعطاه أسماء الدعاة والتنظيم الحزبي الذي يعمل له، وهكذا انتقلت قيادة التنظيم من الهاشميين الذين ينتسبون لعلي بن أبي طالب إلى العباسيين.
هم لم يعلنوا بأننا نريد الخلافة لنا، وإنما للرضا من آل محمد. كان شعارهم في البداية للرضا من آل محمد.
Over the next 30 years, this message persuaded many Alid Shias to join the Abbasid cause. In 746, this secret movement turned into full-blown revolution in the eastern part of the Islamic Empire, in what is today the Shia state of Iran.
It's very, very hard to say whether the Abbasids used the Alids. They certainly wanted to accrue as wide a support base as they possibly could. And they certainly wanted those who supported an Alid Caliph to join their movement.
Within 3 years, the Abbasids had captured Kufa, the caliphal capital of Ali. It was in this mosque that the name and identity of the Caliph-in-waiting were finally revealed.
They proclaimed a man as Caliph called Abu al-Abbas as-Safah, and he was a descendant of one of the Prophet Muhammad's uncles, and he based his claim to the caliphate on that kinship with the Prophet Muhammad.
In 750, the Abbasids entered Damascus, capital of the mighty Umayyad state, the largest empire yet known. But in the years to come, they would struggle to maintain the unity of the vast state they now controlled. By the mid-8th century, the Abbasids had seized control of the caliphate, but did little for their cousins. A sense of betrayal took hold and fermented among the Alids. In a bold and dangerous move, they declared a rival caliphate in Medina. An Abbasid army was rushed to the city. It ruthlessly crushed their rebellion.
عندما استتبت الأمور للعباسيين لوعد أن الظلمات التي أصابت أهل البيت قد لا تكون أقل من الظلمات التي أصابت الشيعة في العهد الأموي نفسه.
The Sunni Abbasids consolidated their dominance of the center of the state from their newly built capital, Baghdad. But they had failed to exert the same control over the provinces of the far west. In 756, an Umayyad fugitive prince called Abd al-Rahman reached Andalusia. Only 6 years after the collapse of his grandfather's caliphate, he succeeded in reviving the Umayyad dynasty with Cordoba as his capital.
عندما خرج الأمويون أو عاد الأمويون أو استنجد الأمويون بالأندلس بعد سقوط خلافتهم في دمشق، كان طبيعي جدا أن يعودوا إلى الأصل، أي أن ما وقع هو اغتصاب للخلافة، وأن العباسيين هم مغتصبو الخلافة، ونحن سنصحح هذا الوضع هذه المرة انطلاقا من أقصى نقطة في العالم الإسلامي، في الغرب الإسلامي وبالضبط في الأندلس.
The Umayyad Emirate in Andalusia was the first to break from the Caliphate. But it would not be the last. Soon, another state at the western edge of the Muslim world, in the Maghreb, would break away from the Abbasids. And this time, it would be their own cousins, the Alids.
بدأت تتكون قناعة لدى الأسرة العلوية أنه لا يمكن إقامة مشروع مستقل عن هيمنة المشرق إلا بعيدا عن المركز، بعيدا عن العاصمة، وبالضبط في الأطراف حيث لا تستطيع الخلافة أو لا يستطيع الخليفة أن يصل وأن تطالها يده لإجهاض هذا المشروع.
In 788, Idris, an Alid fugitive, arrived here in the Moroccan city of Moulay Idris Zerhoun, a city that now carries his name. Recognizing him as a descendant of the Prophet, local Berber tribes were quick to offer him their oath of allegiance as ruler of the region. And so was born the Idrisid Emirate, the first independent Alid state.
إدريس حمل مشروع دولة يمكن أن تضاهي أو توازي أو تنافس سلطة المشرق، سلطة الخلافة في المشرق. وهذا هو ما يفسر كيف أن الخلافة العباسية شعرت بقلق شديد عندما علمت بأمر بروز دولة علوية في أقصى نقطة من العالم الإسلامي آنذاك، اللي هي بلاد المغرب.
But with the new and expanding state, just 3 years old, Idris died. He was laid to rest here, in the city that still bears his name. Idris had allegedly been poisoned on the orders of Harun al-Rashid, the most famous of the Abbasid caliphs. The statue of Shahrayar and Shahrazad in Baghdad. The two main characters of 1001 Nights. Legendary stories inspired by the opulence of Harun al-Rashid's court. The golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate.
بغداد أصبحت مدينة الدنيا، لأنه هذه المدينة لا يأتيها الفلاح ولا يأتيها العامل فقط، فبغداد تجمع بها كل علماء العالم وكل مثقفي العالم وكل أدباء العالم وكل نقاشي العالم وكل مهندسي العالم وكل أطباء العالم، ولذلك صارت مدينة للعلماء.
Under al-Rashid, scholars began the great task of transcribing and translating the cultural and scientific works of former civilizations. Encouraged and supported by the Abbasid caliphs, Muslims began adding their own scholarship to this stock of human knowledge, laying the groundwork for Europe's Renaissance in centuries to come.
Ibn Sina, or the West knows as Avicenna, had written not only philosophical texts, but also a very important treatise on medicine. Was translated into Latin, became the standard textbook for European medical schools for centuries.
But the golden age of the Abbasids was destined to be short-lived. In 836, the 8th Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mu'tasim, moved his capital here, to Samarra in Iraq. It was also to be a military base for the Caliph's new army, an army of Turkic mercenaries, toughened by life on the steppes of Central Asia. An army that would soon erode the power of the Caliphs.
بدأ العنصر العربي يبتعد شيئا فشيئا عن مصائر الأمور في الدولة العباسية، حيث أكثر المعتصم من الأتراك وأصبح هم أصحاب النفوذ الحقيقي.
In 847, here in Samarra, Turkic army commanders installed Al-Mutawakkil as the 10th Abbasid Caliph. And for a century to come, they would effectively rule the Caliphate, appointing, deposing, torturing, and even killing a string of 12 caliphs who were little more than puppets.
ولم يبقى للخليفة يعني إلا الصفة الاسمية والشرعية، حتى كان يقال خليفة في قفص بين وصيف وبغى يقول لهما كما تقول الببغاء.
The caliphate clearly had become a symbol and had no effective power anymore. And in the Muslim world we had a multitude of different political regimes in the various parts, reaching from what is today Spain to the sub-Asian continent. Often this period is seen as a period of decline because of these political divisions.
But it wasn't just a matter of the slow fracturing of the state. At its western edge, a new threat was on the rise. Mahdiyya, this small town on the Tunisian coast, would soon emerge as the seat of a rival caliphate. And this new caliph would not be Sunni, but Shia. Iran, heartland of Shia Islam in the modern world. Today, Shia make up around 15% of the global Muslim population of more than 1.5 billion. In their belief, it is the title of Imam and not Caliph that confers the right to rule. The vast majority of Shia in the world are known as Twelvers. They follow a hereditary line of 12 Imams descended from Ali, the Prophet's cousin, and his wife, Fatima, the Prophet's daughter. A line ending with the last Imam, Al-Mahdi. The Twelver Shia belief holds that Al-Mahdi disappeared in Samarra in 874. He will re-emerge at the end of the world as the ultimate savior of mankind.
يعني لو سألتني عن الخلافة أو الإمامة كما يؤمن بها الشيعة وهل هي وراثية أم ليست وراثية، لقلت لك نعم هي وراثية. سلالة الرسول من ابنته فاطمة هم الأئمة من بعده. وبالتالي فإن هذه الخلافة تعتبر وصية دينية وليست وراثية.
But this holy commandment was no protection against a deep divide in Shia belief. Al-Kazimiyya Mosque, Baghdad. The shrine of the man who marks the division of Shi'ism into two strands. It is the tomb of the seventh of the Twelver's Imams, Musa al-Kazim, who died here in the year 799. Others, however, dispute his status. They consider the real seventh Imam to be his brother, Ismail. They came to be known as Ismaili Shia.
The Twelver Shiites were traditionally not interested or did not strive to take political power because they believed that they were waiting for the return of the Mahdi, so that at that point the righteous regime would be installed and anything in between would basically be a heresy to rule in these lands.
But for the Ismaili Shia, there was to be no waiting for the return of the Mahdi. By the late 9th century, their preaching had taken root among the Berber tribes in North Africa. A new movement was on the rise, with its roots firmly in the Shia tradition.
لم يقع الإعلان من أول على أنها هي حركة تريد إقامة خلافة، لا، كان أهم شعار هو العدل بين كل المسلمين، النصر للمستضعفين. يعني كانت في الأساس حركة ذات وجه اجتماعي، وبالطبع العنصر الهام هو الحكم لآل البيت لنشر العدل.
In the year 909, in Kairouan, Tunisia, Ubaydullah, a man claimed to be a descendant of Ismail, was declared the Caliph of the first ever Shia Caliphate. It would be known as the Fatimid, after Fatima, daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, an ancestor of all the Imams.
The concept of the Ismaili Caliphate is completely different from the Abbasid Caliphate because of the claim to divine inspiration and divine guidance which the Fatimids put forward. They certainly developed an institution which was theoretically completely different from the Abbasid.
The Fatimids now began to expand their state westwards into the Maghreb. But this would lead to a clash with another major Muslim power. And soon, the Islamic world would find itself in a surreal position. By 912, the Umayyad Emirate in Andalusia was over a century and a half old. Ruled from Cordoba by the 8th Emir, Abdurrahman III. After crushing all rebellions and uniting Andalusia, he looked towards expanding southwards across the Mediterranean.
The establishment of the Fatimid Caliphate in what is now Tunisia, which was called Ifriqiya at the time, meant a big threat for the Umayyads in terms of their political control of the Berber polities that existed in the area.
To strengthen his position, in 929, Abd al-Rahman declared the Andalusian Emirate an independent Umayyad Caliphate. Three centuries on from the founding of the title, the Islamic world was now divided between three caliphs, two Sunni and one Shia.
The ultimate result of that really was a decline in the value put on the notion of the caliphate itself. So it leads to huge rifts, politically speaking, within the community, as well as the religious differences that these different caliphates signal.
In Baghdad, the suffering of the Abbasid caliphs continued under Turkic military domination. But by the mid-10th century, a new force had emerged. The Buyids, a Persian dynasty, put an end to Turkic control of the caliphate.
تولى بنو بويه وهم شيعة، ومع ذلك أبقوا الخليفة السني في بغداد. ليش؟ لأنه قالوا إذا ولينا واحد شيعي معناه إذا أمر الجند بقتلنا يقتلونه، ومن الأفضل أن نبقي على هذا السني، فإن أمرنا جندنا بقتله فيقتلوه.
Worse still was to come for the Abbasids. In 969, a Fatimid army captured Egypt. 3 years later, the fourth Fatimid Caliph, Al-Mu'izz, abandoned his capital, Mahdiya in Tunisia, and headed east. For the next 2 centuries, the newly built city of Cairo would serve as the seat of the Shia Caliphate.
The Fatimids considered their caliphate universal, so ideally they wanted to expand their power from their original base in North Africa back into Egypt, on into Syria, and ultimately to encompass the whole Islamic world. They weren't able to achieve that, and what instead happened in the 10th century was the Islamic world became divided between a number of different caliphates.
Meanwhile, in the west, a storm was gathering. Christians, uniting under the banner of the cross, were looking eastward to conquer the Holy Lands. The approaching struggle could not have come at a worse time for a divided Muslim world, and for the caliphs who were at their weakest point as they turned to face the Crusades.